own book, it's kind of fun to come over and tell people how come I write books in the first place, in case they'd be interested and maybe want to go right home and scratch one off themselves, which is not terrible likely. I've been writing ever since I was a little kid. And I told my mother I wanted to be a writer when I was about 15. She said, well, you better go someplace else besides here. We lived in Cahokia, Missouri, a little bitty old town. Nothing ever happened up there. And she said, if you're going to write, you better go someplace where you can find out people and things and happenings to write about. It's about the best advice she's ever given me. Next best advice I've ever heard to that is to tell a kid, find something you like to do and go see if you can make a little money at it. Which is a good thing to tell a kid because that's what he's going to do anyway, most generally. I didn't know whether I would ever be able to make a living as a writer, but I didn't care. I wanted to use the language some way and pass it on, because that's what all my teachers did when I was going through school. And they're the ones who inspired me to trying to learn something myself so I could pass that on. Well, I lucked out. After I got out of college up in Columbia, I came down here to teach school. And I wanted, well, I've got to tell you first of all, my first wife was from Shannon County, from a little town called Eminence, which I still live in today. When I met her, it wasn't that she was so interesting, but the way she talked just knocked me out. I thought I had an accent in North Missouri. I had no idea what an accent was. And the best part of it, I went down to Eminence to meet her family. And the way they talked, it wasn't that it was so different than the rest of Missouri talks, but the way they expressed things was 10 times better. Like people in Shannon County and over most of the Ozarks, which those of you who have visited around know already, never say anything plain. They always have to make it really clear so you'll remember, because they don't want to waste their words. For instance, you would not say, if you lived in Shannon County, my, that's a tall girl. In Shannon County, you'd say, if she fell over, she'd be halfway home. Well, I had to get used to that, but once you get used to it, you can't put up with anything less. I mean, a man don't get drunk. You say, that feller got so drunk he had to hang onto the grass to lean against the ground. Well, you make a little mental note of that. And you can never look at a real down drunk again without thinking of that particular description. They had that in their family, and my first father-in-law said, well, Maud's my own sister. My own sister-in-law. And he said, but if I do say it myself, that's the ugliest woman I've ever seen in my life. She's ugly, they had to put a poke over the head for a baby nurse.
Oh.
Well, I got a picture of that, of having somebody have to slip a paper bag over their head before their own baby. You know, it's one of those kind of things that are unforgettable. So I started jotting stuff down. And I found that there were so many ways to put things. Had an old feller said one time we'd gone to, I guess, a rodeo. And this guy came out and he was the most bow-legged soul I'd ever seen in my life. And I was thinking what my mother and dad, both being polite Missourians, would have said, my, that man is bow-legged, isn't he? Not my first wife's family. He said, that man would have to get out of bed to turn over, wouldn't he? or you know, even, you know, there's no way that man could catch a pig. We talk like that down there because we listen that way and we think that way about things. I thought, I think I'd like to stay down here and catch as much of that as I can, because it's kind of fascinating. People up in North Missouri talk pretty dry, but they get it said, but they don't say it so memorably that you'll never forget it. And I thought that's a place for me to go. So I came down here and looked for a school in Shannon County to teach, because I had a teacher's degree. And all the schools were already taken up. They already had teachers. So I came up to Dent County, and I got the last school available in Dent County on Horse Creek. And in Fiddler's Ghost, I tried the best I could to try to tell about that first year that I taught school. I taught school for 2 more years until they began to, well, everybody got the idea of consolidation because it was for all the right reasons. But I came down to teach one-room schools. My first mother-in-law taught school in Shannon County. She said, you've got to get used to these kids. They're wonderful, the way they think, the way their minds work, the way they talk. It'll all be interesting to you. So I would have liked to have gone down there and followed her way, but I couldn't do it. But I didn't miss a thing. This school that I had out here, I just had one of the kids that I taught came up, Kenny Hudson, that first year of school. And of course, he's a big grown fellow, and I am too. But he, get the phone, I can't do everything. We had the most fun in that school. There was only 9 pupils, and that's why the school district was so little and didn't have any money, and they couldn't afford anybody but me, which is the reason that was the only school available in Dent County. So I went in and took it. I said, I just want to teach, and I want to live here and learn about different things. And he said, well, you know, that's a very poor district down there, and there are not very many children. Well, as it turned out, there's 9 children, and it takes 15 to make a school. Well, luckily a family moved in who had 4 children, and we managed to cheat a little bit and eke it out so that I could go ahead and teach a year of school. But when you try to like play softball on a one-room school lot, and you only got 9 kids, and they've got to choose up sides. And the boys did not want to play with the girls. Well, maybe later in life. All they wanted to do was play ball. And they didn't think girls could play ball. Well, I had some girls in that school, big 8th graders. They made great ball players. And I asked one of these boys, I said, how come you don't get these girls to play, make up a team? He said, Mr. Jane, girls don't want to play baseball or softball or none of that kind of stuff. They want to sit on the front porch and caucus all day. Well, I'd never heard a little kid use the word caucus. That kind of knocked me out. And what I took to doing with those children, I'd have a little piece of paper on my desk like this one Diana's given me so that I don't lose my brain standing up here and talking, let one story remind me of another, and we'll all be here through supper time. I'd make a little note, caucus, because I had remembered that. I hadn't even begun to understand the level of language, not just the difference in it, because all of my little kids spoke like Elizabethan courtiers. I had learned in college that during the time of Chaucer, leading up to Queen Elizabeth I, and you know, she was an old timer. She was the first one they had over there. That they said descas for discs, wastas for wasps, postas for posts, joistas for joists. That was correct language at the time of Queen Elizabeth I. It wasn't in the year 1951 when I was trying to teach these Beauforts something so they could go out and get a job. But the way they spoke was so beautiful, I didn't want to mess with that. But I thought, if some kid gets a job in a lumber yard in Salem and goes to work and calls them joistas, he's going to get laughed at. I don't want my kids laughed at. They were delightful kids, although I laughed myself, but I tried to do it to myself. I had one little girl dressed up. She was in the 6th grade, I think, and we had a Christmas party. And she was all dressed up in shoes, shine, patent leather, and had little braids with ribbons in them and everything. And she looked so cute. And of course, by this time, I just loved all those kids. They were like my family. One of them was my family. I taught my oldest daughter in that school. This girl's, I teased her. I said, I know what you're getting ready to do, Betty. You're getting ready to find you a boy and get married, aren't you? And she said, no, Mr. Jane, ain't you ever heard if you marry too young to the wrong mister, you got 60 years to sit on the blister. I got my piece of paper, I wrote that down. And I've tried to live by it as best I can. They were, the language, the use of words, the feeling they had about things was absolutely wonderful, and I knew whatever I taught them, I was going to teach them out of that. Like when boys would come to school and they'd say, Mr. Jane, how's your mistress? They were talking about my wife. They still called her Mr. and Mistress Jane, like the Elizabethan courtiers spoke of Mistress so-and-so. I didn't want to break that habit, but I knew I better break some of them or they were going to break their hearts when they got out there among people who'd make fun of them. What I did, and this is the thing that I hope that people like Kenny Hudson remembered, and I think all my kids did, and the problem with teaching school in 1951, little old kids, that the 8th graders, half of them are not only married, they're they have grandchildren. And I don't, it's not necessary for them to remember all the details and trivia stuff that I taught them back then. But I just hope that they held on, and their family, to those old ways of saying things, the old ways of pitting stuff. I got the biggest kick one time out of, first time I visited Eminence. I wanted to go down and see what that was like, see what my future wife's folks were like. And I got to town, and how many of you guys have ever been to Eminence? Anybody? Oh, thank heavens, or you'll recognize what I'm talking about. The first time I came into town, I got up next to the I hitchhiked down there was no bus. And I got to the courthouse square foot, and I'm just looking at everything, all these huge trees, and there were 2 big old hogs rooting in the courthouse lawn. And I thought, I'm gonna live here if it hairlips the Pope. And it took me 50 years, but that's where I am now. Because the town is just as valuable. It's the only town I have ever lived in, including Kahuka, Missouri, which is where I started out, that has no dog laws. And all the dogs, I was walking up the street and there was the most beautiful black and tan coonhound I ever saw in my life, and he didn't have a collar. And I stopped a kid on the street. I said, do you know who that dog belongs to? He said, you mean old Toby there? Toby. He said, that's a town dog. I said, what's a town dog? He said, well, it doesn't belong to anybody, but it kind of belongs to everybody. I mean, he goes out to the grocery store and waits for scraps, goes to the back of a restaurant, waits for scraps, goes to people's houses to visit with their dogs. He said, this town's full of town dogs. I know I'm moving down here. We still have town dogs. We don't have one leash law, one rule. We don't have a pound or anything. And everybody accepts everybody's dogs. I like that because I like dogs a lot. I don't have one, but I love them. Well, I don't, I live on the steep as a mule's face. It's my house in the middle. You can't put a fence around it. And if you didn't have a fence of some kind, a dog would become a town dog. Oh. Which is all right. I may get a dog. Right now we've got cats. Diana loves cats, and I do too. I was storing up stuff for Fiddler's Ghost the first time I saw that town, and the first time I saw those people, and the first time I saw that little schoolhouse, and a little house for us to live in on the creek. And the first part of the book has me in it, because I'm the school teacher in the book. The rest of it has nothing to do with me at all. It has to do with things that I learned traveling around, joining a bluegrass group. Of course, everybody knows Ozarks picks. I learned to pick the banjo before I'd been there a year while I was still teaching school. Everybody had a fiddle on the wall, mandolin under the bed, whatever. Music is just part of that part of the country. And of course, when I was in Salem and they consolidated all the schools, I thought, I'm not leaving, I'm just getting acquainted. So I took a job at the radio station. I was one of the few people who could pronounce Khrushchev. or whoever the head Russian hoo-ha was at the time. And they said, "You'll do fine." Well, I did. I stayed there 9 years. And I met the Dillard brothers, and they were good pickers, and they said, "I think we all," I picked with them a lot, said, "I think we all ought to go to Nashville and become a band and become famous." And by that time, even I knew better than that. I said, "Guys, Nashville is so full of bluegrass pickers, their feet are sticking out the windows. What do you want to go there for? Let's go to California. Nobody's ever heard of us, but half the people that live in California came from here. Let's go do that." So we joined up, got an old wreck of a car, and headed for California. And I can guarantee you, any other bluegrass band in the world would have starved to death before they got to Oklahoma City. I wouldn't advise anybody to try what we did in this day and age, but we got there, we were pretty good, and we were fun. And I'd stand up on stages like we'd stopped every place that would hire us on the way to get gas money. And I'd tell them about our hometown and our home state. I'd tell them about our, what we were all about and where we were from, what the people were like, and the music we played and everything. And they loved it. And I'd tell them stories, which is I still yet am afraid to get up here for fear and start a story because one will remind me of another. And there you'll be all afternoon wondering, why did I go out of that bookstore? And I didn't want that to happen. We got a job. This is where luck's at. We got a record contract the first month we were there. The third month we were there, guy came in from the Andy Griffith Show and watched the set, didn't say a thing to us, went off back, said, "Andy, I found this really nutty looking family you're after." And so we went in, our manager, there's one thing about it, when you're in the Ozarks, you know when you don't know something. And if you don't get somebody that does know to kind of show you around. So we hired a manager. And this guy from the Andy Griffith Show came to our manager and said, "Would you have the boys come down and audition for Andy?" Andy Griffith, we'd been watching. All the time we rehearsed and we're trying to learn to play together and everything. I was learning how to thump a bass after playing a banjo for years. Because we already had, a first-class banjo picker. They didn't need that, but they needed a bass person. So I learned to play bass. But while we were rehearsing on the back porch of my house, the big porch hung over a big pond back, we'd have to stop every night that Andy Griffith Show was on, called in, go and see this Barney Fife and Andy and what kind of people would Andy imagine would live in this little town to write that show. It was fun. I thought, I better watch that because maybe someday I might need it. I never thought I'd ever be on it. And Andy hired us in a New York minute, which in Ozark time is about 2.5 days. And he said, "You boys are fitted just right. You look kind of like you ought to work at a bait shop." And I thought, you're right, except that we are bait. Andy was one of the highlights of my life. I don't have time to explain him because I'd like to take forever. Like the time I said, "Andy," we got to know him. You get to know Andy the 10 minutes after you met him because he talks to you. And if you ask him a question, he looks at you and he says, figures out, how the best way to answer that you'll understand, and then he'll explain it to you. So if you ask him a question, you better be ready for an answer. I asked him, "Andy, how come there are no black people in Mayberry? It's a little town in North Carolina. How come there are no blacks?" And Andy said something that I still value as far as a guy that most of us think of as a movie star, thinking about things out, because he knew that his little show, he didn't know he was going to do it for 40 years, but he knew it was going into people's homes. And they'd be curious about that same thing that I was. He said the way, and this is 1962, he said, the way black people are treated and looked at in this country, you got to understand, I would love to have black people on the show. He said, I grew up in town with black people, I knew them, went to school with them. But he said the tension between race now, I don't know how to use. I've got a half hour, which means I've got 21 minutes to be funny for the United States of America. That's every state in it that has a television station. And he said, that's pretty hard to be funny in 21 minutes. And if I used a black person, I've got to use him as a token, and there's no way I'm going to use a token black on this show, or I've got to weave him into my cast, whose job is to make trouble for Andy to solve. And he said, I don't want to use a black person for trouble, and don't want them to poke fun at him. Took him about as long as it took me to tell you what he said, to tell me that, but he looked right at me, and he pointed out his points on his finger. He wanted me to know that, and he wanted America to know what he was, and that's why the shows lasted so long, because America did listen. They knew his foolishness. My Lord, what kind of town would have any kind of crime that you'd entrust to Barney Fife? He's crazier than a box of rectums. Well, I shouldn't say he's dead now, but before he was dead, he got pretty crazy too. I went on tour with him one time. We were having Andy Griffith reunions for the ones of us that were left, and we were just dying off like leaves off a tree. And I did a trip to, wasn't Selma, Alabama, but Diane would remember, but I can't remember, the little town in Alabama. And Hurricane Opal had just gone through the town. All the trees are laid down flat, churches laying on their side, you know, one of those kind of things. I don't know how we're going to do this. There's no electricity or anything. But our job was to go there and do some advanced publicity for the radio stations, which were all off. But they did have recording equipment, and they had generators so they could record us. So here went me and Ernest T. That rhymed.